Hey, level uppers, it's Larry, and this is a lore overview of one of the most historically significant dungeons in Kunark, Howling Stones. There is a ton of context that's captured in the History of Kunark series, so make sure to refer to that as needed. Once the green mist had all but destroyed the entire population of Charasis, the Iksar people would form into independent tribes across the lands of Kunark, and they would start to build their own towns and cities. One tribe in particular, the Kunzar, were responsible for building the grand city of Charasis, and Charasis would grow and thrive for 200 years, leading into one of the most significant figures being born from it, Venril Sathir. Originally a potent warrior mage, Venril Sathir became a practitioner of necromancy over time, and he was always seeking knowledge and power behind the dark art. There was a rather powerful piece of text, in particular called the Unholy Writ of War, and this caught Venril's attention. Before Venril was born, there was a powerful Iksar named Charasis, who had mastered both mysticism and necromancy to impressive levels. Even more impressive was that he was able to establish a direct line of communication with the god Zabuxaruk, who held the knowledge of unholy battle magic. This was the same magic that the Charasis once used to dominate virtually everything. A pact was made between Iksar and God that would grant this tome of unfathomable and evil dark arts to Charasis, but would require him to sacrifice 100 intelligent beings, which he fulfilled. The circumstances behind Charasis' death are unknown, but Venril was able to secure this text and decipher it. While the mysteries of immortality weren't as accessible as he hoped, having access to this unholy writ of war allowed him to implement advanced war techniques and command armies of animated dead. His Kunzar armies conquered their opposition with unyielding fury, which eventually led to the uniting and assimilating of the 5 prominent Iksar tribes. Whether it was the fate of the Sathir bloodline or just the Iksar way of life, Venril would commit Patricide once he had grown so much in power, and under his leadership, the empire would start to branch out from Charasis, growing substantially in power and presence. Venril would marry Drusella, who was the eldest daughter of the Obelisk tribe of wizards, and the two would build the greatest empire ever known. Drusella was completely compliant with continuing to unleash a wave of terror and domination across Kunark to their enemies, and as time went on, she would manage many of the empire's affairs from Charasis, while Venril himself would start to operate out of the newly constructed imperial city of Sebelis. Approaching old age, Venril obsessed over trying to unlock the secrets of necromancy that would allow him and his wife to live forever. Unfortunately, Drusella would die unexpectedly, and not live to see the end efforts of her husband's quest to their immortality, and this devastated him. He saw to the formal funeral rituals and her burial within the elaborately built crypt of Charasis, but almost immediately after, Venril cast every citizen from the city. Only the Royal Iksar Guard and select servants were allowed to remain within the city, but this was against their will. It was their life sentence to serve the deceased empress through death. Venril also ensured that the entrance to the city was concealed to the best of his ability. In his desperation, Venril would resort to making a pact with the god of hate, Inaruk, which demanded that the weak and sick were routinely sacrificed to swell Inaruk's cauldron of souls. In return, Venril would be given the knowledge of lichdom, which required a dark ritual to be performed. He prepared an amulet into which he would siphon his soul, and this amulet was to be placed in his corpse upon his own suicide. A successful ritual performed by his loyal initiates would allow Venril to rise again as an immortal, undead king. Drusella and Venril's only son, Ryle, would be made aware of his father's evolving corruption and aimed to put a stop of his quest towards immortality. Ryle interrupted the ritual at a critical point that rendered it a catastrophic failure. In the same patricidal way that Venril came to power, Ryle had ensured that the family formality had gone full circle by killing his father mid-ritual, which effectively captured his soul within the magical amulet. Ryle destroyed his father's body and attempted to hide any evidence of this foul play within Charasis. However, the loyal servants that were more sensitive to what exactly happened took the amulet left behind and hid it in the crypts of the city. This is when the dark cult formed that dedicated their existence to reviving Venril's soul once again, and that cult's name was the Arisen. It was thought that Ryle was the only one with knowledge of how to enter the city, but that wasn't entirely true. One of Venril's royal guards who had died in Charasis was in possession of a scroll that he kept, which contained the secrets of how to enter the city. This particular royal guard must have been in high regard to Venril because his body was sent and prepared for burial by the mortician of Sebelis, who thought the scroll he discovered with these instructions was simply nonsense. The scroll was lost for decades, but the descendants of the Cult of the Arisen would eventually discover it, and this would help refocus their efforts on their primary purpose. Decades after his treachery, Ryle would be killed in a surprise attack by Trakenon and his band of outcast dragons, and the wreckage, located in the North Sea of Timorous Deep, wouldn't be discovered for hundreds of years. A sledge merchant, or scavenger, who the Arisen had connections with, brought in a wealthy haul of items from the wreckage that included the pendant of Ryle. With their improved knowledge of necromancy, the Arisen believed that if they could find the body, or bones, of Ryle, that they might be able to resurrect Venril using the amulet that his soul was trapped in. But despite the vision, the plan never came to fruition. Surprisingly, Ryle's corpse, still draped in jewelry, would be found after a scavenger discovered it near the wreckage many years later. He would take Ryle's corpse as a trophy back to be sold to the highest bidder, which happened to be a goblin king named Kabaktak. Kabaktak placed Ryle's body in his throne room and claimed that it was a goblin ancestor of his who defeated Ryle. There was ongoing, escalating conflict between the mountain giants and goblins, and the mountain giant king, Farslik, a descendant of Warslik, captured the goblin stronghold that included the now bones of Ryle, which the giants took as a souvenir. These bones would travel back and forth throughout conflict until they were eventually sold to an Iksar merchant named Vlistes. The cult of the Arisen were very much still present in this current generation, and still had connections throughout the continent. Once word spread of these remains being acquired, the cult moved quickly to purchase them and used the old tattered scroll to gain access into Charasis, which they were successful with. The cult spent 5 decades within Charasis trying to find the Amulet of Sathir within the city, which had recently been devastated by a massive earthquake caused by meteors hitting the continent. Their original goal was still intact, and they hoped that by bringing the soul of the father into the body of the son would allow them to resurrect their first king of Sebelis. Finally, the cult located the amulet and were ready to perform the dark rites along with the bones of Ryle. Initially, nothing happened, and the cult members believed that they had utterly failed. They left the bones of Ryle on an altar beneath the ruins of Charasis. However, the cult was incredibly successful in ways they could not have imagined. When the ritual was performed, the souls that had been trapped in Inaruk's cauldron of souls were able to escape their torment and re-enter the material world. The influx of dark energy awoke the spirit of Venril Sathir, and it is said that it was her doing that allowed the ritual to be set up for completion, which wouldn't happen for another 300 years. It would be the small sect of Sarnak who discovered the scrolls once used by the cult of the Arisen and unwittingly completed the ritual, which ultimately brought Venril Sathir back into the body of his son, Ryle, but also cost the looting Sarnaks their lives. To this day, the haunting howls of the damned from past and present are heard echoing off the stones of the canyon. And that's the lore that brings us to the dungeon Howling Stones that we all know and love. Thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, and make sure to check me out on Twitch and Discord. We'll see you soon. Level up, hype!